Assalamu alaikum, dear brothers and sisters. Assalamu alaikum. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun. Wa salamun ala al-mursaleen. Walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. I finished talking about Islamic finance and the riba a few weeks ago, and in my last lecture I said that I would try to record a lecture on the concept of economy. So this is that lecture. Why I thought this was necessary, because I believe on one hand, understanding different tools and intricacies of finance are important, but even there is a larger concept of economy or economics that we need to understand even in better terms. And I find that people are equally deficient understanding these concepts, and sometimes they have confusion about what is Islamic and what is not Islamic, what is just and what is not just. So in that regard, I'm going to provide an overview of the concept of economy and certain things which I find extremely important and useful for all people to understand, especially Pakistani people to understand, because Pakistan is going through deep financial trouble due to multiple reasons. So why is that so? But this information I'm going to provide is useful for anyone, for any country, but especially for Muslims and especially Pakistani Muslims. So let's see if you would agree with me that I was able to share with you some useful information. If you find it that way, please provide your comment. They would be deeply appreciated. So economy, what do we understand by the concept of economy? In simple terms, I'm not an economist, so I would not bore you with technical terms. So basically, when we say economy, what we are talking about is matters of money and resources and their management. Basically, that's what we are talking about. We're not talking about politics or political parties or political values or religious values. We are talking about matters of money and resources and their management, how they are managed for an individual, that would be an individual's economy, or a society or a country, and in that case it would be a society or country's economy. So the term economy means, for practical purposes, matters of money and resources and their management. So if you pay attention, and especially pay attention to historical attention, because economic activities have been around since human beings have become sophisticated. So if you look at all that history, and especially recent history, recent means during last 100 to 300 years or maybe 500 years of human history, you can divide economies in different ways. So because we are talking about not for an individual, I'm talking about here for a country, on country basis. On country basis, the matters of resources and money and their management or economy can be completely controlled by the government. So on one extreme, there is an economic model where all resources and the money and their management is fully controlled by a government. In old days, this was a common model because most of the world places were ruled by kings or autocrats, and kings own everything in their, technically speaking, they have full control in their area of influence or in their country. Now, which I would call monarchical system, which is full control. Now, this kind of system is not very common in the world, but still can be seen. For example, a good example may be Saudi Arabia. Well, the king is the ruler, and technically speaking, he has full control of money matters, resources, and how it is managed. So that is one example of total control. The other way of doing this same thing, a total control, is what we call communism or communist system, where government, there is no king, but the government is completely in control. But there is a difference between the first and the second one. For example, in a place, in a monarchical system where there is a king is in charge or in control of everything, people still have ownership of things. The people have different levels of ownership. But in a communist system, the concept of ownership is different. For example, in a communist system, nobody really owns anything, technically speaking, and everybody owns everything, meaning all the resources and all the money is owned by all the people in the country, and the government is basically in charge to run that. So that is communist system. So what is an example of that? Well, USSR was a good example of communist system, was an example. Nowadays, probably the closest example of this kind of economy where nobody has any ownership at the same time, everybody has the same ownership and the government is running the show, is Cuba or North Korea. These probably are only two examples I can give at this point where this kind of economic model exists. It existed in USSR, not anymore, and it kind of existed also in China, not anymore, and we will go briefly into why it changed. So the first is total government control. Now, I say total government control, economists usually use the term command economy, which means that in this type of system, somebody is in control or in command, and that person or that entity is dictating who is going to get what and own what and earn what and produce what. So all those decisions are made by an entity or a person. Now, this is one side. On the other side, there is a different kind of economic model where everything is private owned, meaning that government does not own really any significant economic activity, or technically government has no ownership. All the money and the resources or the business or businesses are owned by people or privately owned. So this economic model is private owned or free market economy. While on this side, it's the government or the king who decides what is going to be produced, which factory is going to be installed, and how the money is going to be distributed, government or the king. On this side, it's the market who decides. By that I mean, if there is a need for computers, companies would produce more computers. If there is no need for computers, computer making companies would dwindle, they would disappear. So the market drives this economy compared to this one. So that's why this is called free market economy, if market is the only driver for this economy, this economic model on this side is free market economy. Now, when the economy is of free market type, people do not have equal ownership. On this model, in communist model, they say that everybody has equal ownership. On this side, it is already understood that people do not have equal ownership. Some have less, some have more. So people who have less, they try to get more, they work hard, they innovate, they try to obtain more. in this system, they say that everybody is equal, so people have less incentive to work hard and innovate, because at the end of the day, ownership is limited. It is dictated by either the government or the king. So there is less incentive. While here, there is always an incentive, because this is free market economy. Now, there is really, on one hand, I provided you an example of a command or controlled economy, which is USSR, and nowadays in North Korea or Cuba. Is there an example I can give you for a completely, totally free market economy? Presently, if it is there or if it ever existed. Really, there is no such example. But economies can get closer to that. It is, you would see if you reflect more, that it is very, very difficult to make an economy completely free, because that has its own problems, and that's why countries don't let it go completely free. It is somewhat controlled. So the world economies, countries' economies, are somewhere in between. Some of them are completely controlled or command, and some of them are free market or free economies. So in this two extremes, there is spectrum. There could be many economies. So for better understanding for you, I have divided the spectrum into 5 different levels. So just for better understanding. So let me give you those 5. Number 1 is on this side, which I said is completely controlled. And in today's world, the example is North Korea. Now, to give you a flavor of what these economies are doing, I thought I would give you a number called per capita GDP. Basically, per capita GDP means that all the total income of the country divided by number of people, that number is per capita GDP, which means that that number tells you how rich the citizens of that country are. If that number is higher, doesn't matter what the population of the country is. If the number is higher, people are richer, the society is richer, the country is rich. If the number is lower, so the country is poor, and similarly, in overall, individuals are poor. So that way we can compare citizens of the world in different countries. So when I do that, in control, the most controlled economies on this extreme is North Korea. Per capita GDP last year in North Korea was $1,500 a year, $1,500 US, North Korea. Russia was 12,000 per capita GDP, Russia. Cuba, 9,500. And Saudi Arabia, 23,500. These are different numbers in the same category. Now, if you notice, there is a tremendous difference in these numbers, and that is due to another factor, which I don't know what economists would call, but I call it economic gold mine concept, which is that sometime, like an individual who is born and he doesn't do anything, and he inherits millions of dollars, and without working hard, he or she is already rich. Similarly, that is a gold mine for that individual. Similarly, sometimes countries get lucky. And how they get lucky? Without much effort of their own, they have some product to sell. For example, and nowadays you would understand either precious metal or oil and gas. And that's an economic gold mine. In those countries who have these, and if they play it well, and if they deal with it intelligently, they can do much better. That's why in this category of controlled economy, though North Korea's GDP is only $1,500, Russia is 12,000 and Russia's main product is oil and gas, Saudi Arabia is 23,500 oil and gas. A large part, not all of that, large part of that is oil and gas. And Cuba is 9,500, no oil and gas. So Cuban economy is better than North Korean economy, at least, closer to Russian economy even without oil and gas. So that way you can determine how different countries are doing in comparison to each other. That was controlled. Now let's move this line here a little bit. And here things get less controlled. And why countries and societies move from here to there? Because countries have learned over the years, over the experience of centuries, that economies do better if they move in this direction. You would notice that. So that is the reason that the USSR, which was completely controlled command economy, they a little bit move in this direction, which means government gave away control of some of assets to people, not completely, but less controlled. And similarly, China. China used to be completely controlled economy, but gave away some. So now government has less control, still has significant control in both cases, but less control. So what is an example of less controlled economies? Well, less controlled economy, China, per capita GDP is $12,500. And Pakistan, per capita GDP of only $1,500. And this year is probably even much less than that, $1,500 per capita GDP. Now you can compare you can see that Pakistani citizen in a Pakistani country, of course, is much different, poorer compared to even the countries I mentioned. Now this was command, less controlled. And then the next stage is when economies become relatively free. So I would divide them in 4 quarters. So the first was command or control. The second was less control. Third one is relatively free economy. Why relatively free? Because in this type of economic model, it's actually almost free, except that government still controls some sectors for different reasons. Sometimes the reasons are security reasons or whatever reasons, government can still control. But most of the economic activity here is in third quarter is free. And an example of that is most of the Western European countries like Germany, their per capita GDP is 51,000. America, USA, per capita GDP is 69,000. Again, Pakistan's GDP is $1,500 and America's GDP is $69,000. So as you can imagine, the difference. Now, that was relatively free. Now, is there an economy which is totally free? I told you there is no such thing as totally free, but countries do try to move in that direction as much as possible. So all the countries who are successful, they're trying to move in this direction as much as possible. So I'll give you a couple of more examples. For example, per capita GDP of Singapore is 78,000. And per capita GDP of Switzerland is 93,000. Now, as you notice, if you do your own research too, you will notice something, that as we move from this side to this side, economies get bigger and bigger and richer and richer. Big and rich as we move from this direction to that direction. So individual or citizens of those societies when those societies move in this direction, they become richer and the economy gets bigger. And that is universal. You can see everywhere, except I stated that their exception would be the so-called economic gold mine concept. And that would be, for example, better understand. I didn't mention, for example, Qatar. Qatar's GDP is probably close to US's GDP, but you can't compare Qatar to, for example, to Switzerland or even Singapore, because the nature of their economies, there are many other factors. Those economies are much more diversified, while Qatar's economy is mostly oil and gas based. And so that's economic gold mine concept, and that cannot be duplicated everywhere. On the other hand, rest of the economical activities and the concept can be duplicated anywhere. So when I say that economies become freer, free market based, not command, that could be applicable anywhere. And wherever that happens, economies get bigger and people get richer. The other on one hand, economic gold mine concept is important to discuss. On the other hand, the concept of economic corruption is also, corruption is part of every society, but corruption can also destroy any economy. Any of these economies can be destroyed completely by corruption. So that is an understood concept, and that's a separate concept. What we are saying is that then if corruption remains average, then what happens to economies? Now, one other concept to understand. So before I go further, so far what I have delivered to you is concept of economy, which means the concept of money and resources and their management. And economies come in different types. They could be controlled economy, less controlled economy, relatively free economy, and free economy. So Pakistan is in the category of less controlled economy. Pakistan is not in relatively free or free economy. Pakistan is also not in the first category of completely controlled economies, the second one. Now, before I go to a next topic, very briefly, a few words about matter of money. I said the concept of economy is the matter of money and resources of money. Money nowadays, or currency, it's a concept important to understand that it has no value of its own. It could be paper or digital. It has no value of its own. Its value is determined by the commitment of the government. If the government is strong, the value is there. If a government falls or the government is weak, then the value of that currency also falls. There are also many other factors, but one of the factors is the backer. Who is the backer of that currency? So the value of any currency is relative. It keeps on changing. It keeps on changing minute by minute. Every day it keeps on changing due to multiple factors. Mostly, few factors we should understand. One of the factors is if there is a need for a currency, its value would increase, just like anything else. How would need increase? Well, a country's currency's need would increase if country has something to sell. If that country has something to sell, its currency has more value because people want to buy that stuff from them, so their currency has more value. If a country does not have things to sell, country's currency would decline its value. That's one thing. The other thing is, if, like I said before, if the backer or the government or the political system collapse, then the currency would lose its value. The third thing is, value of currency also is determined by how much it is in circulation. Obviously, corrupt governments or inept government can keep on printing currency and circulate more notes, so which would also decrease value of currency. So these things are just briefly about currency. It's a big topic, but I thought I would just touch it for a reason. So the concept is, and the next concept is, after learning all this of different economies, I am talking to a typical Pakistani. So what should the government do then? Where should we correct our course? And what should the government do? And what should government not do? So I thought to explain you that, I have listed few concepts and see if you agree with me and if you could understand where I'm coming from. See, the thing is, for an economy to flourish, or any country's economy to flourish, it is always better to increase the size of its economy, or the size of the pie, as economists say, instead of breaking the pie into small pieces. This is an economic concept, meaning if you have, let's say, a pizza, and there are 20 people who are going to, and we're going to serve that pizza to 20 people, we're going to slice it in 20 pieces. But if there are 40 people, so if we divide that pizza in 40 pieces, that every piece would become smaller and people would get poorer in a sense. So the piece here, the piece of the pie is actually the economic pie, meaning for government, it is not wise to break the economic pie into smaller pieces, but by doing that, their citizens get poor. So what am I talking about? A good example of that is a politician or a political party can commit that they would come and create 10,000 jobs. And what they do is they create 10,000 jobs in the same industries or departments which already are existing and running. They don't need more people, but they create 10,000 jobs. So what they are doing is breaking that economic pie into smaller pieces, and end result is everybody's poor. So the first concept is that it is always better to expand the size of the pie instead of breaking into smaller pieces. So the government role is not to create jobs, not to give jobs that way. If government is really interested to create jobs, they should make policies to create more industries that would increase the size of economy. That should be the way to increase jobs. But if you look at the history of Pakistan and their political parties and what they had been doing for decades, they come into power and they insert thousands and thousands of people in same departments which are already running. So the end result is everybody is getting poor and poor and poor because the economic pie is being broken into smaller and smaller pieces. That's the first concept for every Pakistani to learn, that any politician or any leader who says that he or she would create or deliver thousands of jobs, the next question should be how, where, how would you do that? If they say that they would put 1,000 in railway and 1,000 in PIA, that means they are going to destroy those institutions and everybody would get poor. That's the main concept for people to understand. Unless people would not understand, as long as people would not understand, these politicians would keep on exploiting this and just for the sake of people's votes. They don't care about the economy that much when they provide that kind of job. The second concept, the second concept is, and this is if you listen to me carefully, a self-employed citizen is always better than an employed citizen for a country's economy. Again, a self-employed citizen is always better than an employed one. It doesn't matter what the level of employment is. A self-employed citizen is always better than an employed one. So economically speaking, should be more respected than an employed one, self-employed. Their self-employment could be a hawker or rediwala who comes and bring vegetables to your street. He or she is self-employed. Somebody who is running a minivan service in the city, taking people from one direction to other, is a self-employed citizen. Those people deserve more respect than any official who are employed by people. So you have to understand that almost all the government employees, at least, they are employed by the public. They are paying for it. On the other hand, self-employed people, they do it on their own. So in economic terms, they should always be more respected. That's one. Now, the third concept is that there is a level which is even higher than self-employment. First, I stated that the self-employed citizen is always better than an employed one in economic terms. But there is a level which is even higher than self-employment, and that is a citizen who who employs other people, who provides employment. That citizen or that activity is even higher, has higher value than the previous two. A just simple self-employer or any job earner in a private or government sector. So the first level is people who do jobs either in government or private sector, any level of job, lowest to highest. They are here. The next level is self-employed. The topmost level is those people who are self-employed, but they also provide employment to other people. So they are really the cream of any country's economy. They should be respected more than anybody, and the whole country's policies and the society should work so that these people on the top are doing their jobs, and more people are trying to replicate this activity, the top activity, which is self-employment in a way which provides employment to other people. Now, fourth concept, the primary responsibility and goal of a government is to make sure that these two, self-employed and really the top one, which are providing employment to others, that policies are designed in a way that these activities are happening without any trouble. That's really the main role of the government. Government's role is not to be involved in business. Government's role is to make policies and make sure that these two activities are happening. That's the primary role of the government. So the primary goal of a government's fiscal policies is to help and promote self-employment and entrepreneurship. The top one, which I said, those self-employers who provide employment to others, I'm talking about entrepreneurships. So entrepreneurship is the top layer, and the primary role of the government is to promote entrepreneurship and make sure it thrives and flourishes. At the same time, government should not be part of the entrepreneurship, and that is not role of the government. Fifth concept, free market economy is always better than command economy. Always. Free market, whatever the level of command economy is, and like I said, there are few different models, pure communist model or a monarchy or a king's model, while on this side is free market economy. Free market economy is always better than these economies in all circumstances. And you can look at numerous examples in the world right now, in last 100 years, 200 years, you would find these facts that the free market economy is always better than these economies. So a country's government should make sure that the economy becomes free and is market driven. Now here it may be important to mention that I told you that there are different types of economies, the command, less control, relatively free, and free. A question could arise, what is the Islamic model of economy? I think I missed that part when I was talking about this spectrum. What is the Islamic concept? Well, there is no direct verse in the Quran about this or any direct hadith about this, but there are hundreds of hadiths and dozens of ayahs of Quran directly or indirectly talking about business and economy, both at individual and societal level. So when we look at all that information together, it is my humble understanding that Islamic model of economy is not command economy. It's not command economy. It is not like USSR or communism. It is also not like a monarchical system run by a king. That is not Islamic model of economy when we look at the whole concept. So that is clear. Then the question is, where does Islam stand? Is it the less control, relatively free, or free? Well, I said Islam, this is not Islamic model for numerous reasons. On this extreme is totally free. That is also not Islamic model and easy to understand because Islam does not allow certain business activities for a variety of reasons. So of course Islamic model is not completely free, while it's not completely controlled either. So where does Islam stand? Is it now less controlled like Pakistan or relatively free like Europeans and American? Interestingly, when you look at the overall data and information available to us, Islamic model of economy is relatively free model of economy, which is the model followed at this time by Western Europeans, Americans, South Korea, Japan, Singapore. These economies, you would notice, and there are many other economies like many UAE economies now, they're going in that direction. Why? Like I told you, that people have learned that going in this direction make economies bigger, larger, richer. It happens to be that the Islamic principles also state that the Islamic model would be relatively free. If anybody has more interest in this, in my revised version of the book Islamic Finance and the Riba, I have written a chapter about this, and just for this reason, and it's a long subject, but basically that's the Islamic model. So for a country like Pakistan, where the whole economic system in Pakistan is not based upon Islamic principle, it is less control type, which is similar to, like I said, even China, less control type. That is not Islamic system, though they are more successful than Pakistan is. But Islamic system is the relatively free market economy. Sometimes, people who, especially some economists, sometime who try to give an Islamic perspective, and they get confused between so-called capitalism and what am I talking about. I would suggest to you, don't get fooled by these terms. For example, some people give long lectures about all the bad things happening due to capital system. Well, like I told you before, that corruption and greed and selfishness can destroy any economy. Doesn't matter which one, it can destroy. Many of these economies, even a very controlled command economy like communism, they started with good intention, but due to corruption and all that and negative things can be completely destroyed. Similarly, any other economy can be completely destroyed. So, so it is not fair to just keep on talking about the negative side of so-called capitalism or capital based society, which is really the free market based economy. The reason I would give you is for practical reasons. For example, for societies, poor countries, even in Pakistan, look around for yourself. Your cell phones, your telephones, your internet, your international travel, your pharmaceuticals. I can go on and on. All these, even oil and gas, all these luxuries which are available to now to average citizen of those societies, they were really not created by the government of those societies. The government of those societies, when it was up to them, telephone service was extremely restricted. It is only when some businesses, large businesses in the world, were able to develop things in a different way and made it available and cheap for everyone, then the citizens of the world were able to enjoy them. So, as you can see, that the capital or free market, this is the free market concept, meaning that a company or a business is allowed to make money as much as they want based upon market forces. Of course, by not breaking laws, but not destroying environment. That's a different concept. But they are allowed to do that. So only because of that reason, they were able to produce all those things beneficial to average citizens of the world. In very command economies, those things don't happen. There is no example to provide you that those things happen, that they were able to produce those things for average poor citizens of the world. So these concepts are sometimes confusing and misleading. Next concept is that even in a free economy, not every economic activity is beneficial for the society, and different societies have different version of that, but that's another concept. The next concept to understand is the government, including its military, shall not be directly involved in any businesses or entrepreneurship. That is not correct according to Islamic concepts. Why? Because Islam's fundamental concept is justice, and all those activities, entrepreneurship by government or semi-government or military establishments, are fundamentally unjust. They are fundamentally unjust. They fundamentally favor a certain class. They fundamentally deprive most of the people, and they fundamentally outperform because they outmaneuver and outcompete the rest of the people. So, which is unjust. So, you can take any example. Which country I can give you an example of where government-based entrepreneurship failed? Well, It was happening in China. That's why they moved and they changed their system and they gave ownership to people instead of government. Not completely, but still significant. So even today's living, North Korea and Cuba as those models. Pakistan is in between. Pakistan is uh, uh, partly like those countries. Significant portion of Pakistan's economy is semi-government or government-based or military-based, which is fundamentally flawed system, and because it is a fundamentally unjust system. It fails at the end of the day. It never really makes the whole country successful or rich. It only helps to make certain people successful and rich. So this is a concept, of course, who are involved and their families are involved would not understand, but that is a fundamental. The other country, for an example, would be Egypt. Same thing. They are also failing for same reason. Next concept is no financial system can thrive or sustain without clearly established rules and regulations. That is where the government should take the lead. This is where the government's role is, providing rules and regulation and establishing those rules and regulations, and also a system to deal with conflicts. Next concept is injustices of one generation should not be a burden of the next, and that is a deep concept, and that is happening in front of our eyes. Finally, a few more concepts. In a successful society, the taxation, the tax rate should be low. There is no example in the world where higher tax rates were able to make a country's economy successful. Of course, every society, every government needs some taxation, but in general, the tax rate should be low. Higher taxes do not help the economy. Next concept is conflict of interest. This is a very deep concept, and most successful societies are aware of this problem, and most unsuccessful societies are either completely ignoring it or unaware of it or ignorant about it. Conflict of interest. Conflict of interest in economic business activities. For example, if president of the country owns 5 cotton mills, then of course, when he or she is president, there is a conflict of interest. That should never happen. That should never happen. If that person ever take that position, then some type of action should happen, that there is a disconnect between that official and his or her business, which is a routine in America, but you never hear about it in countries like Pakistan. Agriculture sector can be subsidized because food is a security issue, and people don't understand that the agriculture sector can be subsidized, partly subsidized, not mass scale industrial agriculture, but to a certain extent, agriculture sector is subsidized in almost every society. At the same time, military is always subsidized. Military doesn't produce anything. Military is always subsidized. And that should be an understanding, clear understanding the military is subsidized. But at the same time, military should never be in charge or part of entrepreneurship. Military should not be in the business of running any businesses, any enterprises, any factories, any real estate enterprises. That should never be part of military's portfolio in any society. If it is, those societies are in deep trouble. Prime examples, Pakistan, Egypt, for example. Now, central bank of the country central bank of the country shall be an independent and non-political entity. And in a country like Pakistan, it should a member should be taken from each province, and that's the way it should be, and it should be totally apolitical. Finally, two more things: rights of disabled, orphans, and elderly shall be respected and guaranteed by the government. This is the second part where government takes the lead. The first one is rules and regulations about finance and economy. The second is rights of disabled, orphans, and elderly. This is where government's role is. Again, government's role is not to run enterprises or businesses. And finally, an entrepreneurship shall be balanced with the potential impact on the environment and nature. Islam does not accept injustice, even if it is done to non-living things. Islam does not accept injustice, even to non-living things. Justice is the fundamental concept of Islam. Any system we would design, the first principle to establish would be justice. And all the things I was stating, they are based upon that principle. So again, in this lecture, I tried to give you a generalist understanding of what economy means, what different types of economies are in the world, where Pakistan is, which is closer to command economy, and that's why Pakistan is in deep trouble, because of course, the corruption is one reason, but the underlying fundamental structural reason is that Pakistan's economy is so much controlled and commanded by government and other establishment, and that is the real reason. Unless measures would be taken to release that grip and free that economy, average citizen of Pakistan would never bear the fruit of economical activities. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala provide wisdom to leaders in those societies like Pakistan. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bring knowledge and intelligence and wisdom to the next generation, especially people who are going to be next leaders, who understand all this. It's a whole different subject. What happened? When did this happen, that the Pakistani economy was hijacked by government and its establishment? That's a different subject, and we can go into that. But the more important subject is how to release that grip and how to make Pakistani economy freer, market-driven, so that anybody, see, in a market-driven economy, anybody is free to be involved in economic activity just like anybody else, without any threat, without any stopping from the government, and without any undue competition from government or semi-government enterprises. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put us on the right path, put these societies on the right path. That would be my final dua for my home country of Pakistan. Assalamu alaikum.